The dark cosmos. Stay cosmic.
Everything changed after the storm. The ship, its crew, and as they would soon find out, maybe the Atlantic Ocean itself. The Leonard III was an industrial fishing ship. More specifically, it was an illegal vessel, which profited by fishing in prohibited areas and selling at exorbitant prices to the highest bidder. In a dying world where every species was endangered and every specimen should have been treasured, these greedy merchants were known worldwide as some of the worst criminals of modern times. The man in charge of the ship, Captain Martin, was wanted by every country in the world, even though the families of every president had filled their bellies with the fish he had personally sold them. He was a very tall blonde man, and what he lacked in muscle, he had in an intimidating attitude. Overseeing the operations was Rachel Shaw. She was a disgraced marine biologist, called unethical and hypocritical for using her knowledge to decimate the numbers of fish in the ocean instead of protecting them. The blonde had benefited from life at sea, which turned her skinny body into a weapon for fighting for her life. She worked alongside a legend of the seas, lately going simply by the name of Johnny, the mind behind the heavy machinery responsible for ending a dozen species. Johnny was big and burly like the machines he worked with, and took pride in every scar that adorned his large and tanned body. The day after an extraordinary storm that badly knocked the Leonard III off course, this eclectic group was presented with an event that anyone slightly less ambitious would have identified it as the danger it was. Captain Martin, however, only saw this as an opportunity. In the morning, when the storm was officially over, the skies cleared and the waters calmed. The sun shone brightly and the few clouds in the sky looked positively heavenly. Captain Martin called his two colleagues to the bow of the ship. The rest of the crew were repairing minor damages to the ship, cleaning up the floors and everything harmed by the angry winds and water. These three infamous individuals were planning their next dishonorable business venture. Captain Martin faced them and said, "We've been working together for years now. I doubt either of you have seen or heard things about these waters that I haven't, but I'll give you a chance." He made a pause, raised one arm, and pointed at an odd little island in the distance. "Do you know what the fuck is that thing?" Johnny snickered at the unusual sight of Martin being confused by something, but Rachel got goosebumps and a chill on her spine. Captain Martin was supposed to know the oceans better than anybody else. The captain passed them his high-powered binoculars and waited. First, Johnny grabbed the binoculars. He chuckled again, a little nervously this time. Where exactly are we?" he wondered, his voice trembling just a little. "Does it matter?" Martin snapped at him. I guess not. I've just never seen anything like it. Not in the middle of the ocean. Nowhere." Rachel lost her patience and snatched the binoculars from the man's hands. "Let me take a look," she said, confident that if she hadn't personally seen whatever phenomenon they were discussing, then she would have at least studied it back when she was welcomed at her old university. But no amount of hard research or harder experiences at sea would have prepared her for this. She stifled a gasp and said, "What the hell is that?" Captain Martin groaned, cursed under his breath, and retrieved his binoculars impatiently. He took one more look at the mysterious island in the middle of the sea. If it really was unexplored, then he could be the first one to profit from it. "I have no fucking clue," he said. "But we are going to find out. We'll get there in an hour. The two of you are the people better prepared to give me an answer and an idea of how to exploit it. So, I want you ready to go when we arrive. Now go. Now!" The three of them went their separate ways and prepared for the first exploration in all their lives where they genuinely had no idea what they were up against. The captain ordered his crew around and got the ship moving faster than before. They traveled on calm waters for less than an hour until they reached their location. When the ship stopped moving and they met again, they took a closer look at their challenge and found themselves even more confused than before. There, in the middle of the ocean with no other piece of land in sight, a rocky mountain raised from the unsteady waters. It was surrounded by sharp boulders of varying sizes that made it impossible for a large ship like the Leonard 3 to get close to the main thing. It was an odd, rugged structure that at least Rachel would have tried to explain with a movement of tectonic plates or a submarine volcano or any other desperate explanation she could come up with. The problem was, there was a tunnel at the center of this giant piece of rock. As if an unexplored island wasn't enough to suggest they could find fresh resources to exploit. Now, it became even more of a mystery. The three of them jumped into one of the smaller boats attached to the side of the ship, and they were lowered to the surface of the water. Captain Martin expertly maneuvered their boat toward the main rock as they discussed what they were facing. "I can't tell you how this piece of rock came out of the ocean," Johnny said as they got out of the boat and onto the shore. "But the tunnel looks like some kind of metal. It has to be man-made. It has to be." Rachel gave him a non-committal hum and said, "Law enforcement from all over the world have been obsessed with us for years. If they have chased our lonely little ship throughout the globe as if we were such an interesting scandal, I don't see how the construction of a tunnel on a rare little mountain in the middle of the ocean could have gone unnoticed." "Maybe it isn't new," Captain Martin suggested when they first stepped into the tunnel, making their voices and footsteps echo in the walls. "Have you heard about doomsday bunkers? The richest of the rich in the world have gone into hiding in perfectly luxurious caves to live their last days in peace and opulence, or hide long enough for the rest of us to kill ourselves. Can you think of a better hiding place than the middle of the ocean?" If they hadn't been so busy coming up with theories, pressing their hands to the metallic walls at their sides, and trying to see the end of the tunnel, maybe they would have realized the kind of danger they were in. Maybe, at least, they would have noticed that the thin stream of water at their feet was growing several inches with each passing minute. Rachel said, "I'm not interested in finding people, but I bet we could find some interesting fish swimming along the rocks outside of this thing. Expensive stuff, I mean." "I like that idea," Johnny said and stopped walking at once. "We really should leave. This place is creeping me out." "Wait, just hold on a minute," Captain Martin mumbled. He stood in the middle of the tunnel. He looked behind him, he studied the water flowing along the floor that suddenly reached his shins, and he glared at the end of the tunnel until he gasped. "Johnny, come here, now!" Johnny groaned. I really would rather not." "God damn it, Johnny! Don't be a coward. I don't pay you to just stand there. Come here immediately." Johnny started walking reluctantly, but still he said, "You pay me to maintain the machines that keep our storage full, not to explore eerie tunnels in the middle of nowhere." "Guys!" Rachel called out, irritated by their arguing and impatient to leave. "Maybe we should reconsider. Let's just take a moment to think this through." Her words were useless, though. Johnny got close enough to their boss for Martin to grab his shoulder and push him in front of him to keep walking down the tunnel. "Well, I'm the one who brought a knife, and I want to see what's at the end of the tunnel. So, we're doing what I say," Captain Martin snapped. "Oh, come on, man, let's just go back." Johnny groaned again, but he kept walking, knowing full well that Martin's threats were meant to be taken seriously. The captain continued pushing Johnny forward, but looked behind him to call Rachel and say, "Come on, Shaw. Don't you want to see what expensive specimens are at the end of the rainbow?" He had the audacity to laugh. "I'll give you a hefty bonus if you bring back something we can sell like gold." Those were the magic words that made Rachel stand taller, raise her head, and start walking again. Rachel pushed through, going down the tunnel even though the water was reaching her knees. Maybe Martin was right. Maybe some billionaire was hiding there, hoarding fish and resources they could sell like precious jewels. They walked for a few minutes, but right when the water reached their waist, a yell from Johnny stopped them in their tracks. "This isn't natural!" Johnny yelled, completely desperate. "Don't you see it? From outside, I could have sworn the mountain was just what? A couple dozen feet deep? We've been walking longer than that. This isn't normal, or natural, or right." If Johnny had anything else left to say, it was promptly knocked out of his head by the slap from the captain that threw him down to the bottom of the tunnel, splashing water all around him, getting completely submerged for a moment. Johnny seemed to struggle to get up, so Martin reached down to help him. He wanted to knock some sense into him, not to drown him. But then they felt the pull of the water. The stream wasn't going from the tunnel to the outside, at least not anymore. The water was pulling them in. It was flowing much, much faster, like that of an angry river after a storm. It knocked the captain off balance, and suddenly the two men were fumbling in the water to get up. Rachel never claimed to be a good person in any way. Her first instinct was to turn around and leave them there, save herself. Unfortunately, returning to the ship without a captain would likely get her in trouble with the rest of the crew, and it would most certainly not get her the money Martin owed her. So she stepped forward, leaned down, and she grabbed their arms to try to bring them back up to their feet. The water kept pulling. It roared in their ears like a waterfall. The tunnel was abruptly turning colder. The rest of the world felt miles away. Gravity seemed to fail and transform. The exit disappeared. There was no sense of direction, and they were all weightless. They gripped each other like lifelines and moved to their feet. They almost got it. They just needed to walk back to the ship and forget this impossible place existed. Then the stream of water knocked them down again. It was as if someone had flipped a switch on gravity. One moment they were standing in the middle of that place, knowing where they came from and how to return. Then, in the blink of an eye, they were just falling. They got dragged down by a powerful stream of water along the floor. They used every ounce of strength they had, flailing their limbs however they could to keep their heads above water, but it was useless. After one moment of blissful weightlessness, they crashed deep into the ocean. Not the rocky water outside that strange island, with their boat and their crew waiting for them. They were on the other side of the tunnel. They were dazed and lost, but even after the initial shock and turbulence of falling into a giant body of water were over, they simply couldn't find their way to the surface. The tunnel was too strange and confusing, and it had spit them out with enough force that they would have to swim for a long time to even get there. But there was no other way out. Wherever they looked, it was only miles and miles of water in every direction. Coral reefs, sand, endless depths of water. No surface in sight. Rachel's heart started beating even faster and her body tensed. She gritted her teeth and frowned deeply. The three of them were good swimmers. They had to be, given their lifestyle. And she was the best of them. But this would require inhuman strength and skill. She looked at her colleagues. Captain Martin was still and seemingly calm. Only his eyes showed a small spark of fright in them. He was trying to think of a way out. But Johnny was wide-eyed and looked around frantically. He moved his limbs widely. He was swimming blindly. Ironically, he looked like a fish out of water. Soon enough, he started clutching his throat. He wouldn't be able to hold his breath much longer. Rachel couldn't find a solution. She couldn't do anything but watch him sink and know that in a matter of seconds, it would be her turn. Then they heard a voice. "Breathe, you idiot! Breathe!" Captain Martin swam toward Johnny, gripped his shoulders, and shook him as well as he could while being underwater. "Come on, breathe," the captain said. "Look at me. Can you hear me? I'm talking, I'm breathing. It's okay. Stop freaking out, goddammit!" It was a wonder how easily the captain embraced it. Johnny continued to struggle against the instinct to hold his breath underwater. Rachel calmed down as much as she could. She hoped for the best, and then she breathed in deeply. It was the strangest thing. It was uncomfortable, unnatural. At first, the feeling made her want to throw up, cough, anything but keep breathing. But then she did it again. And again. Martin was right after all. They could actually breathe that water. What's happening? What's this? She mumbled, beyond shocked to discover that she could actually speak and hear herself. The water came in through her nose and her mouth, and the feeling was unsettling. But with every passing second, it only felt easier and easier. Johnny was turning pale and shaking with effort. He looked viscerally sick. For a moment, it looked like he really could kill himself by merely refusing to breathe. But then he couldn't help it anymore, and after a shuddering gasp for air and convulsing temporarily when the water rushed into his body, he calmed down. A dreamy smile took over his face, and he was at peace. He relaxed and started sinking down into the sand and coral at the bottom of those incredible waters they were in. He opened his mouth to say something and, instead, his face contorted, his body trembled, and what came out was a scream of excruciating pain. His body started convulsing much more violently, and the water around him sparked with electricity as if he'd been struck by lightning. Rachel and the captain looked down and gasped in unison when they made sense of the horror at the bottom of that strange ocean. The ground was covered in large chunks of coral, and at first, it looked like there was black sand in between. But then the sand started moving, slithering in between the rocks and finally looking up at them. Eels. Rachel immediately recognized them. Electric eels about as thick as a human body, and one of them had its jaws locked on Johnny's feet. As if they took more pleasure playing with their food rather than eating, the eels let go, and Johnny stopped shaking. His body, startled and in survival mode, started swimming upward. As just another human, Rachel's instinct was to urgently help her friend, but as someone who had devoted her entire life to sea creatures, Rachel was fascinated. She was too preoccupied by the possibilities of taking one specimen of those back home to sell at an extraordinary price. She didn't expect those things to jump like springs on solid ground, rising several feet up in the water until one of them bit her arm and sent a truly horrifying electric shock through every inch of her body. Johnny had survived, so she tried to stay calm, ride it out, and pray it ended soon. She felt every inch of her body on fire, all her nerve endings electrified, and all-encompassing pain. It felt like an eternity, yet it ended quite suddenly when the eel got tired and let go of their prey. The eels continued throwing their bodies up and snatching their jaws at them, hoping to catch them. They swam upward as well as they could. When one of the eels caught Captain Martin's leg, he managed to lean up and grab Rachel's ankle, hoping to pull himself up and out of reach. But he was horrified to find he only achieved to make the electric shock travel through his body toward her. It was a lighter shock. It was still the worst experience she ever had. She doubted they could take much more of it. They fought, they kept swimming even through the pain, and they avoided the eels to the best of their abilities until finally, mercifully, they were too high up to be reached by those dangerous creatures. Staying afloat was easy though. They could do it in place while they regained their breath, but they had to do something to get away from there. Plus, finally, they could take a look at their surroundings. They were in the middle of some extraordinarily large ocean. It was unclear if they were near the bottom or just hovering above a stunningly large reef structure. It was bustling with colors and life. Their eyes were barely scanning the area around them, and already it was obvious the wildlife was abundant and thriving, with bright color and restless activity in every direction they looked. Fishes of the most diverse kinds, colors, and sizes were diving in and out of the coral that surrounded them. It was too much to keep track of. Rachel Shaw was bewildered. Planet Earth had been withering and dying for decades. This was a whole new world, dimension, or reality. There was simply no way they were still in the Atlantic Ocean they knew. This place looked infinite and unexplored. It was untouched by humanity. The biologist looked down at a group of abnormally large and complex electric eels and said, "If we bring these back with us, we could sell them for a fortune." "I don't like it." Johnny sighed and scratched his head, deep in thought, but his ambition won over his reluctance. He shrugged and added, "I'll need to improve some of our fishing mechanisms for this." "You're not thinking big enough," Captain Martin laughed at them. "What's the biggest problem back home? Droughts and contaminated waters. And where are we right now? This isn't saltwater, folks. We can drink this. Hell, we can even breathe it somehow. But imagine the money that people will pay for fresh and fucking breathable water. And only we know the location of this endless source and..." "Hey," Johnny interrupted him. With just one word, it was noticeable his voice was trembling. I love that idea for sure. It's just, first we have to leave, right? God, I really want to leave and, well, take a look." The captain and the biologist turned around to stare at the tunnel where they had entered these dreamlike waters. The tunnel was embedded in one of the gigantic coral walls around them, further confirming that it was impossible that this was just a hidden but natural corner of the Atlantic Ocean. The problem, though, wasn't the tunnel itself. Johnny's issue was with the silhouette steadily rising from the ground. There was something waking up, something stretching upward, tilting its head and examining the tunnel. Calling it merely a fish was preposterous. Animal wasn't a big enough word. It was of serpentine shape and had to be over 100 yards in length and almost half of that in width. From a distance, it looked almost pitch black. At that moment, the team was petrified, struggling to breathe, speak, or react at all. Ice flowed through their veins. There was a pitch at the center of their chests. Fear was too powerful. That thing standing in front of the tunnel, large enough to nearly block it in its entirety, was a monster. It wasn't a shark or a whale. It was much bigger. Its body was protected by several plates like the shell of a crab that creaked and shifted when the beast curved and twisted its massive body. Its face was turned to the tunnel, but the unlucky human explorers weren't in a hurry to face it. The three partners were staring with wide eyes and mouths open. All three of them were about to say something, but the only sound that came out was a furious wail from the captain. His co-workers turned quickly to face him. They barely got to see his expression of extreme pain and the jaws of a fish almost half his size gripping his shoulder. In the blink of an eye, he was getting pulled away from them. "Captain!" Johnny yelled after him and started swimming as fast as he could. Rachel's instincts kicked in and she followed him, but she did call out to him. "Do we have to do this? Do we have to save him?" "There's no money without a captain, Rachel," Johnny replied. "Trust me, I hate this even more than you do, but if he survives without our help, he'll find us just to kill us." "Fuck it," Rachel groaned. "Martin can't die without giving me my money, even if I have to sell his soul and the corpse of the fish that took him." The two of them swam to the best of their ability and soon dove into the natural passageways of the enormous coral surrounding them. They trailed after their captain and its captor. Martin's screams guided them when they lost track of him for seconds. Every moment counted. If they lost sight of the man for even a second, they could lose him forever. They adapted quickly, swimming faster than ever thanks to the ability to breathe those unreal waters. They pushed beyond smaller fish and flinched when small sets of jaws snapped at them. Algae, creatures, and unnamed organisms brushed past them. The reef was a labyrinth. The fish knew its way around, but it was weighed down by the baggage it carried. The wound on the captain's shoulder left a trail of blood lingering in the water all around them. Johnny screamed with the effort it took, but he managed to catch up with the body of his leader. He grabbed Martin's ankle and tried to hold him and yank him out of the fish's grip. It was useless. Worse, it ripped open the wounds even more. Martin's agonized yell reverberated in the water. Johnny and Rachel could do nothing but keep swimming. Rachel grabbed Johnny's clothes and used them to hoist herself closer to the captain. And when she reached his body, she didn't try to free him. She let the fish drag the three of them. She pulled herself forward with the captain's limp arm, and when she was close enough, she pulled the knife the captain always carried on his belt, and she drove it deep into the eye socket of the fish. The reaction was immediate. The fish started thrashing in agony, twisting and turning desperately. Blood splashed everywhere, and the sound of the eye deflating was disgusting. It let go of the man in its mouth. Rachel wasn't done though. She ripped the knife off the creature's eye and then slammed it right on top of its head, hoping brains were located in relatively the same place in that strange world. She was successful. A spray of plum-colored blood burst out of the fish's wounds, but the corrupted biologist only smiled. "I shouldn't even sell you," she said. "I should hang you on my bedroom wall." Her admiration for the rare specimen dead in her hands was interrupted by a sharp tug on her arms. Her partners were pulling her away and once again trying to swim as fast as possible. She had to let go of the fish and demand, "What? What's happening?" "We have to get away from here now," the captain yelled. "Finally you agree," Johnny added. "Just look behind you, Rachel. After everything we've done, you don't want to go out as food for bizarre fish, do you?" One glance behind her was enough to spot the dozen fishes, identical to the one she killed, that were chasing them now, stumbling over each other and crashing against the walls around them in their haste to reach their prey. They looked hungry and vengeful, snapping their sharp jaws as if they could already taste their flesh. Rachel reacted at once, and she swam even faster than her colleagues. Martin snatched his knife back from her hand, and he tried to keep their attackers at bay. The fish actually recoiled and tried to avoid his knife, even more so after he managed to slice open the side of one of them. But that wasn't enough. He wouldn't be able to fight them all. "We need to hide. Find a hole in one of the walls, a crawl space, somewhere these monsters can't get in," Captain Martin ordered. Rachel was leading the group, and she quickly spotted a miraculous hiding place. "Over here!" she yelled, and wasted no time in following through with her idea. Among the endless tunnels of monumental coral architecture, she found a small passageway that seemed good enough. The fish were certainly thicker than her body, meaning they wouldn't be able to get through. She passed through easily. Captain Martin followed as soon as he confirmed she didn't die upon crossing. But Johnny... I can't! He yelled with a wavering voice. His body was bigger and more muscular than his friend's. I can't do it! They're gonna get me. They're coming for me. I can't! You can do it, Johnny, come on! The captain urged him on. Johnny, just do it! Crawl through, you can make it, come on! Give me your hand! Rachel said, leaning into the hole in the coral and extending her arms forward. Johnny groaned loudly. He looked behind him at the fish rapidly approaching him. They looked like piranhas. Not as quick, hopefully not as vicious, but definitely big and angry enough to be worth the risk. He dove into the shaft in the wall and grabbed Rachel's hands, but when she tugged, the pain started. Stop! Stop! Johnny cried out. His shoulders dragged against the sides of the wall. The rough edges of the coral ripped his clothes and scratched his skin. You can't stop, Johnny. Keep moving. This is better than the fish. Captain Martin yelled from the other side of the wall. He was looking for another way out. From a much smaller hole, he glimpsed open space beyond. The center of this ecosystem. The tunnel couldn't be too far. He jabbed his knife into the coral and started prying it apart. He never cared about causing destruction for his own gain. There's an exit here. Just get over here, he called out. Meanwhile, Rachel tried to be gentle, pulling Johnny's arms, shoulder, or clothes, anything to bring him forward, but it proved harder and harder. Fuck! Stop it! I can't make it. I can't do it. Oh my God! Johnny cried out. Every inch of movement was hell. He couldn't move forward. He couldn't turn back. He was stuck there. Every time he moved, the sharp ends of the coral dug deeper into his skin, spilling blood and ripping strips of skin off his back, his chest, and his sides. The water turned red, and then, after a second of suspense, a blood-curdling scream came out of him. They got me! Fuck! The fish got me! Please get me out! Please get me out! Johnny cried out again and again. He thrashed as best as he could in that small tunnel, drawing more blood and hurting himself further. There was too much blood. Dozens of hungry mouths were at his ankles. I'm sorry, Johnny, Rachel whispered. No. Rachel, don't you dare! Don't leave me! Please! Johnny cried out. A second later, the fish started pulling on his legs, more and more until they ripped him out of the tunnel altogether. He was on their side, and they were mauling him. After a moment, his screams were over. Feeling nauseous and shaking profusely, Rachel turned around only to find more thin trails of blood lingering in the water around that little alcove of coral. Martin was ripping apart the wall of coral with his bare hands, desperate for survival like never before in his life. We have to get out of here. I'm not dying in this fucked up fish tank, he said. Rachel tried to swim closer to help him, but just then, an unexpected crash on the wall sent both of them tumbling backward. The wall cracked. Pieces of coral and rock floated all around, and beyond the opening, a million fangs snapped at them. It was the creature they watched blocking their way to the tunnel. It was big enough that the only thing visible was the countless teeth, sharp as needles, that coated every side of its open mouth. It cried a deafening sound, and it reared back just to slam its gigantic head against the complex construction of coral, further breaking it down. Captain Martin boldly swam closer to the edge and the monster beyond it. He looked over his shoulder and smiled at Rachel. Then he said, "Every man for himself, Rachel." A second later, when the monster and its open jaws were close enough, Martin dug his small but sharp knife into the tender flesh between the fangs of the creature. It seemed completely foolish, but when the monster cried out a painful moan and pulled away sharply, taking with it the knife and Martin himself, who refused to let go of the weapon, the man let out a joyful sound, an insane laugh, as if all was going according to plan. Rachel didn't understand it. Maybe Martin had lost his mind. Maybe he was mad enough to hope he could control the giant beast. But she felt the truth in her heart. After everything, They hadn't lost their humanity. And when given the chance to save each other, they fought until the end to take it. Martin had the opportunity to sacrifice himself for her, and now he was gone. There was no way she was wasting her last chance of survival then. So she started swimming, faster than ever before in her life. She left the tunnels of coral behind her. She spotted the great tunnel across the empty space, and she glanced at the nest of electric eels slithering in the sand at the bottom. The giant aquatic creature moved wildly on the water above Rachel, trying to dislodge the intruder attached to it. This created ripples that sometimes pushed Rachel closer to her destination, sometimes pulled her back, and occasionally made her completely lose herself in those waters. Somewhere up there, the captain was fighting for his life, regretting his choice, or planning his next move. Rachel hoped against hope that he really got a chance to turn things around too. Even when her hands gripped the metal of the tunnel, she didn't relax. Even when she breathed fresh air and jumped on her boat, she didn't turn around. It wasn't until she was back on the fishing ship, failing to explain her nightmare to the rest of the crew, that she heard it. It was the creature's terrible call. The monster was sliding out of the tunnel and invading the waters of this world, bringing life and chaos back to the Atlantic.
Hey sci-fi horror fans, it's Jordan. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Thank you to all our official members of the channel. Your support means a lot to us. Craving another scary tale? Click on that video on your screen. Until next time, everyone, and remember, stay cosmic.